Our second scripture reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 28 through 36. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. He was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Have you ever been on a mountaintop, or even a building top for that matter? Have you ever been in a place so high up that you can see for miles and miles in whatever direction that you may look? It can be an exhilarating experience, or it can be a frightening experience. I suppose it depends on how close to the edge that you are standing, or maybe if there's a precipice there, how likely you are to tumble over it. In our reading from the Gospel of Luke, Jesus heads for the mountains. His intention is to pray, and who does he take with them but that famous triumvirate, Peter, James, and John? You know, they were the ones Jesus made fishers of people on the shores of Lake Galilee. And they will be the same ones he takes with them to the Garden of Gethsemane just before he's arrested by the temple guards. This is not the first time, nor is it the last time that Jesus goes to a mountain to pray. What does a mountain give him? What does a mountain do for us when we are in a contemplative mood, a mood to pray? Well, one thing is for sure, it gives us perspective. Problems often seem smaller when they are viewed from a distance of time or space. Going to a mountain certainly gets Jesus time and space away from the jostling crowds that follow him wherever he goes. It gets him away from all those people who are making unceasing demands on him because they know he is a wonder worker. They are coming to believe that he is a person sent by God. Maybe the air is also fresher up there. And maybe the sound and the feel of the wind refreshes him in a way that they cannot in the plains or down by the Sea of Galilee. It could be that going up to the top of the mountain gets Jesus just a little bit closer to God, at least metaphorically closer to God, his Father. Peter, James, and John might have been exhausted by their trek, and perhaps not so exhilarated by their location. Our reading indicates that they were very sleepy. Instead of taking this opportunity to pray, as Jesus was praying, or listening to Jesus pray for that matter, I can imagine them sitting down, leaning up against a rock with their legs crossed at their ankles, barely able to keep their eyes open. You know how when you drive down the freeway and you're getting kind of tired, just hold one eye open as you go. Maybe being with Jesus all of this time has inured them to the excitement you and I might have felt from that experience. You may remember they will have the same problem at the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus goes there to pray, and Jesus had to wake them up there more than once. Well, the setting must have been just right for Jesus, because we can soon read that as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. This scene, this moment, is what we call the Transfiguration. It is the point at which Peter, James, and John recognize that Jesus is not just human, but also divine. I imagine it took a bit of time for the understanding to sink in to the tired minds of those three apostles. I can see them first disturbed by the bright light emanating from Jesus, and then shaking off the haze of their sleep-befuddled brains, then rising up to get a clearer look. And the bright glow of Jesus is not all that they saw. There appeared Moses and Elijah speaking with Jesus. And I think it is significant that both Moses and Elijah had their own mountaintop experiences. You may recall that Moses received the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai and had seen the burning bush on Mount Horeb. And it was also at Mount Horeb that Elijah had gone to escape the revenge of Jezebel. And it was where he heard that still, small voice. We are also told by Luke that there was a conversation between the three, Jesus and Elijah and Moses. And the conversation was about Christ leaving the world and the passion that was to come that would be fulfilling both the law, represented by Moses, and the prophecies represented by Elijah. Now, this must have been an amazing sight for the three apostles, even though they were dazzled by the opportunity to eavesdrop on this conversation. They were also in a little bit of confusion about what it all meant. We know this because Peter offered to build shelters or tabernacles for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. He did not understand that they did not intend to camp on this holy mountain. He did not understand that this was not a time for placid veneration. He did not understand that Jesus had not come here to root himself on the top of that mountain. Rather, Jesus had come to be a blur of motion and activity in the world. Jesus would come down from the mountain. He would walk and work among humanity. Jesus and Moses and Elijah were all above and beyond the need of a tent in the wilderness. It was not the law or the prophets or God that needed shelter. It was Peter, James, and John who were feeling perhaps a little bit insecure at the moment and who would have liked the reassurance of having a shelter. You know, I really love Peter because he consistently says and does the wrong thing. I think throughout the Gospels he represents weak, foolish people who try so hard to get a grip on what Christ is and what Christ means. Peter tries so hard to get this theology thing right, and yet the right of things seems just a little bit out of his reach. I think it is interesting that it is at this point that God gathers up a cloud and literally interrupts Peter in mid-sentence, saying, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Peter is so off on some tangent that God pays him no heed and just says the needful thing. Here is Jesus. Here is the Son of God. Don't listen to your erroneous thoughts about your own petty insecurities, but listen to Jesus. Now this scene ends with a voice fading away, the cloud dispersing, and Moses and Elijah are gone. Yes, the glory of the Lord is revealed. The disciples know now definitively that Christ is not only fully human, but also fully divine. And the orientation of the life of Christ, the life of the apostles, and even our lives is changed forever. And yet it seems the apostles are left with things the way they were before, with only a vague understanding of the experience lingering in their minds. Let me ask you, have you ever been on a mountaintop? And you know the mountaintop we are talking about is not just some high place, but rather at what you might think of as a high point in your emotional or physical life. Perhaps it is your wedding day, or the day you first got a real job, the day you started school, or the time you drove a car solo for the first time. Maybe it was a time when you opened the Bible and found a passage so profound that you could not help but give glory and praise to God. Or maybe it was that time that you put that final piece into a 1,000-piece puzzle and just kind of tapped it in just to get as much out of that as you could. Whatever and whenever it might have been, the sense of wonder or accomplishment or insight had lasted but a moment. The implications of the mountaintop experience may have seemed fleeting, for so soon you had to climb down off from that mountain and walk back out into the real world. For Christ and Peter and James and John, this would be the case. For this transfiguration was a sign of the present glorious reality of the holiness of Jesus Christ. But it was also the harbinger of another truth, that Jesus was indeed the Messiah. He was, he is, as we noted, the fulfillment of the law of Moses and the words of the prophets. It meant he would argue with the Pharisees and be arrested by the Sadducees. It meant he would suffer under Pontius Pilate and die on the cross for the sins of humanity. But none of this changes the profoundness of that moment. It is the knowledge gained by that mountaintop experience that gets us through those valleys. The Transfiguration surely got Peter, James, and John through the passion of Christ. It surely cemented their belief so that even when Christ died on the cross, they could go on with a firm knowledge that he would rise from the dead on the third day, ultimately to ascend into heaven. And that rising, that ascension, is mountaintop knowledge for us. It is our assurance that even as Christ rose from the dead and rose up to heaven, we too will rise and ascend. Even as the life of Christ was a series of peaks and valleys, so our lives are a series of peaks and valleys. And if it were always flat, yes, that would be comforting in its own way, but it might also get a little monotonous too. It would deprive us of those soaring moments when we climb up above the clouds, those moments when we feel close to God, those moments that stick with us all of our days, those moments that make this life worth living. The mountaintop experience, the Transfiguration, gives us an opportunity to look up to heaven and see Jesus for who he really is, fully divine and fully human, our Savior in this life and the life to come. Please bow your heads and pray with me. Eternal and loving God, you meet us where we are, whether we are in the valley or on the mountaintop. When we are low, you lift us up. When we are sad, you give us comfort. When we are weary, you give us rest. Lord, be with us and help us to realize that we cannot always be on top of the world, but at the end, your kingdom will come and all will be well. Amen.